Olives Ocean, still in motion. How could you go? Old video, innate finite, gave you quinine. I'm alright. Jello pastry, you are hasty, setting me up, taking me down. There's no will, 'cause you're a million. I'm alright. You sleep tight. I'm alright. I'm alright. I'm
Hi, my name is Kimaya Diggs, and I'm a musician, writer, and teaching artist based in Western Massachusetts. Welcome to my Black Music History series, produced for Black History Month and hosted by CouchMusic.Live. Thank you also to our sponsors for this series, Valley Free Radio and Downtown Sounds Workers Co-op, offering lessons, repair, and gear worker-owned since 2019. So if you're just joining us, this is the final episode in a 4-part series on Black music history. Every week, I've taken about 15 minutes to tackle a different topic in hopes of deepening your connection to Black history and to Black music and musicians. All of the previous episodes have focused on specific historical moments, people, or songs, but today I'd like to focus on an instrument, the banjo. So what do you think about when you think of the banjo? A skin stretched over a rounded body, a long neck, a drone string, claw hammer playing style, twangy tone. And who do you think of when you think of the banjo? Well, many of us think of people like Pete Seeger, white folk musicians, rural Appalachian old-time music. When I first learned that the banjo actually has its roots in Africa and that enslaved people brought the banjo here to the US and were responsible for its development into the instrument that it is today, I was surprised. And over my last 10 years as a teacher, I've spent a lot of time delving into the history of the banjo, where it came from, what it means to the people who brought it to this country, and what the banjo has come to mean in the present day. And I'm here to share some of that information with you. So, to go back several hundred years, scholars trace the banjo's roots to West Africa, which makes sense because the majority of the enslaved people who ended up here in the US came from Africa's western coastline. The modern day banjo consists of a round wooden body or metal body with a drum head stretched over it and secured with metal pins. The drum head can be skin, synthetic skin, or plastic. The banjo has a long neck that actually extends through the body and several tuning pegs, one of which tunes a shorter drone string. In West Africa, there are over 60 instruments native to various countries that share traits with the banjo, including the ngoni and the akonting, which has 3 strings, a gourd body, and a goat skin drum head. Many of these instruments are played by people in the griot caste, the custodians of oral history, praise songs, and poetry. But some of these instruments are also instruments of the people, folk instruments, just like the banjo. On a plantation, enslaved people did not have much time to themselves, but when they did, singing, dancing, and storytelling were essential parts of the resilience that these people had. Stories told in the oral tradition allowed those who could not read to remain connected to their history and to remember their ancestors and family members. Songs served many purposes: storytelling, lessons, worship and praise, and they were also a way to express the pains and sorrows of being enslaved. At this time, banjos were created from gourds that enslaved people grew, hollowed out, and dried themselves, and the drum heads were patched together from scraps of animal skin. Early strings were made from animal gut or from horsehair. This was truly the instrument of the people. It required very few resources to create one and afforded a player an opportunity to really express themselves. As Thomas Jefferson said in 1781, "The instrument proper to the slaves is the banjar, which they brought hither from Africa." Thanks, Thomas. The Smithsonian says a few musical instruments are more deeply connected to the American experience than the banjo. From the earliest references in the 17th century, the banjo was exclusively known as an African American tradition with a West African heritage. After the end of slavery, the banjo was appropriated by white performers in minstrel shows. As I've talked about in previous episodes, the blackface minstrel shows generally centered around folk music and dance learned from actual Black people and performed by white performers in blackface. As such, the banjo very quickly became a popular prop for these performers. The Civil War then presented a unique opportunity for the banjo to spread across the country. Performers from across the country were fighting in companies together, and many regiments created minstrel bands to keep them entertained. These bands frequently incorporated the banjo, and after the war, soldiers who had newly discovered the banjo brought the knowledge of the instrument back home, where it continued to spread with the continuation of minstrel shows, Wild West shows, variety shows, medicine shows, and more. As the early 1900s arrived, the banjo was incorporated into early Dixieland jazz and New Orleans jazz band, as it could keep rhythm just as a piano could, but was just as loud with the invention of steel strings, but was also significantly more portable than a piano. Recordings and the rise of globalization brought the banjo to Europe, where it was very quickly embraced, especially in Irish traditional music. The banjo experienced more mainstream popularity around 1910 with the rise of a classical playing style and the standardization of banjo production, which allowed banjo players to purchase ornately decorated instruments and further increase their playing volume by pairing resonant steel bodies with loud, durable steel strings and even steel picks. At the same time, the folk music that we generally associate with the banjo today was becoming more firmly rooted in the Appalachian region, giving rise to what is known as old-time music. The Appalachian region of the U.S. was an attractive place for Black folks to settle after the end of the Civil War, because it was a place where Black people could own land, homestead, and provide for themselves and their families, and find work in timber and coal mining. Prior to the arrival of a significant Black population, old-time music in the Appalachian region was largely based on English and Scottish ballads, and the arrival of a Black population, and subsequently the banjo, presented a very unique moment in American history that saw Black musicians using the banjo to accompany traditional European songs, which themselves had morphed and changed over several generations in the U.S. It also saw white musicians in the area adding the banjo to the traditional instrumentation of fiddle, voice, and guitar until the banjo became a true staple of old-time music, particularly the clawhammer playing style. The unique leveling of the Black and white working class in Appalachia and the dialogue between the two cultures via the banjo is really interesting to me. In jazz, a Black music tradition, scholars write extensively about the essential differences between Black and white big bands. But in old-time music, we see a wholehearted embrace of this truly African-American instrument and a complete merging of this Americanized European song tradition with the banjo. Truly a people's instrument, and clearly an instrument that sparked an immense amount of innovation. Within old-time music, there are many distinct styles and famous families that have their own styles and have for generations. It's important to note that old-time music has often been a haven for marginalized people. There is a distinctive Indigenous American old-time tradition that involves the fiddle and a three-finger banjo playing style, such as that of Walker Calhoun, who played banjo and sang in the Cherokee language. And there are unique styles of old-time music within the Cajun community in Louisiana and unique styles in the upper Midwest, due in part to the influence of immigrants from Norway and Sweden. Old-time music is functional music. The songs tell stories, accompany dances, and function as a core element of community building. The banjo also saw some time as a concert instrument with a brief popularity of old-time concerts in the 1930s. The banjo had a renaissance after World War II with musicians such as Pete Seeger and Otis Taylor. Pete Seeger brought the banjo back into the public consciousness with folk music, while Otis Taylor played more African-American roots, blues, and jazz. Earl Scruggs and Bella Fleck were also part of this banjo renaissance. But of this list of contemporary banjo greats, Otis Taylor is the only Black musician. What happened to the Black connection to the banjo? Well, with the rise of urban life and the many complex ways that education, housing, and voting policies serve to reinforce and enforce segregation in this country, Black folks in America found themselves disproportionately disconnected from rural areas, rural life, and rural traditions by the 1960s. The folk music of Pete Seeger was rooted in a rural aesthetic, as was the functional part of old-time music, the country dances. And add to that the directness and urgency of the protest music, church music, and political pop music of the time, not to mention racial tension. It was very hard for many Black musicians and music lovers to feel connected to an instrument and genre that at the time had very little Black representation. Many people point to the amazing multi-instrumentalist Rhiannon Giddens as the most recent person to revive the banjo, and I wholeheartedly agree. She's a very talented musician in so many ways, and as a teacher and lover of music history, I am particularly taken by her reverence for the history and development of the banjo. In an interview, when speaking about African and European influences that go into banjo music today, she said, "You can't peel away the European influences because back in the very beginning, when you think about the Caribbean and its influences, Congo Square in Louisiana, and a mixture of all the African nations with nobody speaking the same language, there becomes this synchronization of all of the modes of expression, African to European. You have all this stuff that's been happening since Africans were brought to this country, which was just 20 years after the first white settlers. That goes hand in hand with the creation of this country, the creation of the music of this country. It's a synchronization of the African modes and the European modes to create something new. It's a process that's repeated with jazz, blues, rock and roll, and hip hop, where the Black community starts this melange and the white community commercializes it." So one of the large-scale projects of Rhiannon Giddens is a theatrical account of the Wilmington Insurrection of 1898. White and Black working-class people were working in tandem to gain political appointments and power in North Carolina in 1898, and white supremacists in the state literally employed the KKK to terrorize the organizers and potential voters, intimidating voters enough to stay home, allowing these white supremacists to win back seats in government. On November 10th, armed white supremacists overthrew the elected government, burned down the offices of a Black newspaper and several other Black-owned businesses, and killed nearly 100 Black residents in the streets in a coup d'etat that had been carefully planned by white Democrats. Rhiannon Giddens' use of the banjo as a central element to her work about this historical event is important. The banjo, as Thomas Jefferson said, came to this country as a distinctly African and then African-American instrument. For generations, it was played exclusively by Black musicians on plantations. It was not concert music. It was functional music, storytelling music, dance music, expressive music, by the people and for the people. The banjo was an accessible instrument. You could grow one yourself in the garden. The banjo presented a unique opportunity for artistic self-expression by enslaved people, one of the only modes of self-expression available to these people at all. People who were enslaved had no autonomy, no self-determination, no assurances for the future, no upward mobility, and no physical freedom. Rhiannon Giddens has a song called At the Purchaser's Option, based on a slave advertisement that I looked up, the advertisement that she was inspired by, and this is what it says. For sale. A remarkable, smart, healthy Negro wench, about 22 years of age, used to both housework and farming, and sold for no fault but for want of employ. She has a child about 9 months old, which will be at the purchaser's option. At the purchaser's option. The buyer of this woman can decide whether or not they want to chip in a few more dollars for this woman's infant child, or if they want to leave the baby behind. The need for self-expression by people enduring slavery was all-encompassing. How could one survive without a way to express oneself, without a way to say something about such cruelty as this? And with nothing, or nearly nothing, the banjo presented an opportunity for such expression of pain, grief, rage, desperation, but also for expression of the small joys, celebration of bright moments few and far between. To use the banjo to tell the story of Black struggle is to tap into an ancestral and uniquely African American tradition, a musical tradition that mirrors much of the African American experience throughout time here in this country. The separateness, the ingenuity, and resourcefulness, the othering, the appropriation, the spread of the banjo across the country, the melding of African and European influence, the rise and fall of class solidarity, issues of access, of ownership, of expression. They are all there within the banjo and its history. Thank you so much for being here with me this week and for the last several weeks. Thank you to our sponsors and to CouchMusic.Live for hosting this series. If you missed the previous 3 episodes, you can find them at CouchMusic.Live in their archive. If you're interested in listening to songs by any of the artists that I talked about today, please visit my Patreon at patreon.com/Kimaya Diggs. Even if you're not a patron, the playlist is available to the public and you will be able to access it. But if you're interested in more educational resources on tackling anti-racism, talking about race with the kids in your life, or you just want to learn more about institutional racism and what you can do to make a difference, please consider becoming a patron. I create monthly anti-racism syllabus that is only available there. You can also learn more about my music work at KimayaDiggs.com or on Instagram at Kimaya Diggs. Thank you and happy Black History Month.
Woman that I needed most, a saint when I was just a girl, a quiet sinner. No one saw her story told around the sun. Narrow blackened body holding all the light of days to come. With melancholy in my veins, my mind is turning and becoming light and hard to hold or capture, freer than a honeybee's. I'm sorry for the time and all the money that you spent on me. I'm sorry for the way I get unstable very easily. My balance is precarious at best. Oh mother, mother, will you come to me? My memory betrayed me somehow. I can see her smiling, telling me to tell the world I'm tired, and so is she. The way I always acted selfish, wanted more than I would give. I hate the fact that someone like the girl I was is made to live, and now her stomach's torn and all her bones are breaking. But I know she made me love becomes a leash, and I escape. My heart is always beating slower than the slowest drum. My stubbornness is hidden in her eyes. It takes an hour to turn around and start to come. Love the things she says until I can't no more. I told her that I read a book. Really, I was kissing other boys behind the pantry door. It's perilous at best to try to tell her she should rest. The stars align and I can see my moon. Oh mother, come to me.